Hey folks, welcome to another pigment pushing video with me, your host, Scott Fischer. Today we're going to talk about my painting Chord of Calling for Magic the Gathering. Alright, let's get into it. So I started with early thumbnails. I'm using my iPad and I'm drawing an infinite painter with the shape tool so I can just create these shapes. I knew I had to have a leader, I had to have a group of people around them, and I had to have a giant worm that they're being summoned. All right, so that was my rough stuff. I went with the one in the lower left. And so what I did was I did another drawing traditionally just in my sketchbook. And it's a tiny sketchbook, as you can see by my hand. Then I did a digital version of it and kind of bumped it up a little bit. And then I printed out the digital version and I did a pencil drawing on top of that. So there you go. That's the next level, just using a normal pencil on some like watercolor paper. Nothing too exciting there, but now it's time to paint. I used a toned gessoed panel. It was already had the brown on it before I transferred the drawing down. And you can see I'm instantly going in and I ghosted out some of that stuff, and now I'm cutting in the negative space. You might have seen me do this before. You know, it's all about the silhouette with me, right? So if you can read the silhouette clearly, which you pretty much can, even at this stage, you can kind of see there's a figure and a harp and a worm and some buildings. Now I know I gotcha. So the silhouette being that strong means we can keep going forward and start adding in the details. And if I do the negative space now, I don't have to worry about it later. My brush can go over the lines and I can always find where that silhouette is. Okay, I knew my color scheme. This is a green card for Magic the Gathering, so we jumped into some green. I went ahead, I know this building is going to be mostly silhouette and mostly push dark in the values, but I had to go in there and go ahead and do some architecture anyway, which is never my funnest thing to do, but we got it done. We got in there, we made some bricks, we made some spatters, and if I keep that stuff in the shadow, it's all the better for all of us. So that's what we did here. Just going in, finding those nooks and crannies, painting up the towers, and I don't love doing architecture, so it's one of the things I did first, right? Once I got that out of the way, I'm going to have fun with the worm. I'm going to have fun with the figures. I know all of that, so let's just get the bad part over with, man, and then we can move on. But it did take quite a while. There's a lot of drawing happening here. I kept it to 3 values. You can see sort of my archways in the background there. I mean, my spires and stuff. But if you look at it, it's really 3 values. We got the main value that was underneath, and I went a step darker. And then sometimes I go a step lighter. But that's it. And if I can keep it to those 3 values, it's really going to help me out. I can build the form really quick. You've got a dark, you got a shadow, you got a dark, you got a sort of a middle value, and then you got a highlight. Once I get that, I can find those little in-betweens. I can go a little bit darker in the dark section, a little bit lighter in the light section. I turned the piece upside down here, and I'm doing a big wash of that rusty brown on there. And now once that dries, because this is all acrylic ink, we're using our classic FW acrylic inks. We love these things so much. So I'm going to wash it on there in a puddle. As soon as that dries and I establish the base middle value for that tower, I then just make my paint a little bit darker, a little bit thicker, and I go in and I just start drawing details. As usual, I'm using my old Robert Simmons white sable brushes. They look like this. I do a lot of work with these little long ones, kind of liner brushes. And there it is, just kind of going in, adding some brickwork, those sorts of things. Not all of that is in my original drawing. I kind of had to invent it a little bit. I knew one of the challenges with this piece was going to be that she's sort of surrounded by white in that negative space, or a light, right? So I gotta keep the things that are her and the worm surrounding her can't go all the way to those high highlights, or we're going to lose them. So going on the underbelly of the worm there was my first attempt at going in there and trying to find values where I could still see it in the squint. If you squint at it, you can kind of still see his underbelly, but yet was still light enough that it was different than the side flank, which is going to have that orange happening again. Once again, I did the washes, and once those settled, I was able to go in with a little bit of a darker color and just do some kind of scales, and then a little bit of a lighter orange around that tower to kind of highlight the edges of that tower. And, I'm working with probably cups of paint. I have all these little tiny plastic cups around like this. There's stacks of them around here, man. I just fill them up with this ink, and I just kind of go to town. Go ahead and doing the detail in on the mouth. I really couldn't wait. I was so excited to do that. We had to jump right into it. Again, the base middle value was kind of set, so then I was able to go in with a highlight and a dark color. You'd be amazed what you can do, once again, if you set a middle value for something, and then you go a step darker and a step lighter, how much you're able to pull off. But I really wanted this to be a slimy mouth. So, I get a little bit darker, like right there in like the very corner of the back of the mouth. Like those little accent spots help make that depth happen. And here we're going darker on these claws. They were kind of just like, I thought they'd be kind of gross if they were kind of reddish purple like the mouth. But as you got to the tip of them, they got really dark. For one thing, you get to see them really easy. But notice that I did not treat the claws in the distance the same way. They're a much higher value. So I'm adding an atmospheric perspective between these 4 claws and the ones that are on the back side of the body, kind of poking down a little bit. Like, if I had gone as dark with those claws in the back, they would have come too far forward and they would have been like little specks, especially because they're so surrounded by that white. We knocked in a middle value for the armor. I actually wasn't sure how the armor was going to look, to be honest with you. That's one of those things I'm just going to have to figure out. Where that hand was raised, I figured there was some kind of strap that came under the worm. And I thought if I put the circle there, maybe I could use that as a thing to frame her hand that's raised up. I thought that'd be pretty rad. When in doubt, cast some shadows. You can see that I put those armor plates down. I know where my light source is coming from, so I was able to just cast some drop shadows along the edge of it. You know what I'm doing here? Establishing my middle value. I'm doing the base middle value for that whole dress area. I'm having to wing some of this. I didn't have the best fabric reference at all, and I was kind of looking at a bunch of different things. So you can see it's kind of scribbly, but I also knew it was going to be largely silhouette and largely in very close relative value. So it's the shape that mattered even more than the wrinkles. So as long as I got it in enough, look, as I'm adding a little atmospheric perspective to the worm that's behind her hips, right? Because I need her to stand off. And as I was filling in the value for her hip area, it was too dark behind her and they were reading too close. So quick atmospheric perspective behind those hips on the worm to set it back in space a little bit more. And you'll see me doing a lot of stuff with atmospheric perspective on this as we continue through. Throwing in some highlights. Going to go ahead and cut the underbelly a little bit more on the worm, on that lower side. Working our way around it. Time to paint this face. And guys, I was not looking forward to this because I'll tell you why. Because I hate painting heads that are the size of quarters. Oh my God, I didn't want to do this. This painting is like 16 by 24, 18 by 24, something like that. That's pretty small for me these days. And the reason is not because I want to do these ginormous paintings, because I don't want to paint these goddamn small heads. It was a small head, so I had to go for it. Okay, once we got the head done, it seemed to work out. So I went ahead and jumped into the main vest area. And you can kind of see it's almost a microcosm of what I did in the beginning of the painting. I put the base middle value, which was that light gray, and then I cut in a darker green into the negative spaces of this tree design on her outfit to establish it. But if you look at it, it's really just 2 values at this point. We'll work it a little bit more. I rendered a little bit on the more round areas, of course, but you know, accented some things in here, highlighting a few things. But look, I've got my reading glasses on in this because this is so goddamn tiny. Oh my God, I don't want to paint. I keep saying, I'm never going to paint this small again. And then I freaking paint this small again. But I'm now saying I'm never going to paint this small again unless it's a zoom in of somebody, and then it's not going to be a problem. But we had to go in and work some of those light blues into the face to kind of work it up, the highlights in that area. And I mean, it's just tiny, tiny, tiny stuff, my friends. Slowly working it, just thinking about what areas of like the sternum here that would come out a little bit more. So I'm highlighting a little bit more in those areas. Throwing down now some of these sort of like a belt tie things this character has around them. This character was already established. You can also see I went in with a pencil because I had to figure out some of the architecture on that building. And now I'm going in and I'm having to reestablish the values of that building because of now what's happening in front of it, right? I wanted you to be able to read those little belty things, so I had to go darker with what's on the building. Also, if you notice, I'm cooling down the building in temperature, right? It's a little bit more gray, and the whole reason for that is so it doesn't get blended in with all the orange of the worm. I was really looking forward to painting the band. There's a whole bunch of them along the bottom here, all playing instruments. And this is me establishing that first pass. I figured these guys would be pretty easy. If I could keep them around 3 values, that would be fantastic. And that's really what I aimed for with them. But it's a back and forth. So I work on the dudes a little bit, and then I wind up having to go into the worm a little bit because the dudes made me change something. You can see I'm just using that darker orange. I'm almost doing a gradient where in the corner of the segments, it's going to a darker orange, and then it gets a little bit lighter diagonally across those forms. And as those repeat in space, sort of like a spiral staircase going in space, that drawing aspect adds a little bit of depth as it wraps back. This was going to be tough because the worm actually comes in front of everything, but he is transparent. And that was something that they didn't even know I was going to do, but I thought I'd give it a shot and I could always get opaque with it later. I think it worked out in the end, but man, it was a lot of me thinking about how I can see the building through the tail. But the idea is that they're summoning this. This is called Chord of Calling. And normally they're not done with musicians, but I said to the art director, I said, dude, well, these are musicians. It says chord. Can I do musicians? Can I do a band? And they were like, yeah, do it. So that's why they all have instruments. And they're using this song to summon this gigantic worm who's about to wreak havoc on this city. So I'm going in those certain areas, I'm going opaque, right? If you look at it in the highlights, I decided to push things opaque. So you're not seeing through the highlights. But if you look at the shadow areas of that tail, or what would be the shadow areas, those areas are translucent. That's where I did some strokes of the building architecture coming through underneath the tail, and you can kind of see it there. Okay, going in again on our characters and making them a little bit darker. Again, I'm just trying to establish their values. Notice I'm not going to go crazy. I'm not going to go crazy with their color. I want you to see them, but I don't want you to just spend all your time on them, right? They're there to support the main character and the worm. So I kept their colors relatively muted, and their values, there's nothing crazy going on. I'm not doing like big areas of high contrast, which is why I keep darkening them. All right, now look, I decided I needed more atmospheric perspective, and I used this gem right here a second ago, which is a big makeup brush. Dipped it in my stuff and went, but that's where it gets even more interesting. I felt the piece needed something extra, a little more zhuzh. And so I broke out a stencil and I started using the makeup sponge and stenciling through the stencil, but I had put down liquid frisket masking film first to protect areas of the painting so I could use the stencil and go through it. And look at that, it's so gross. I love that stage of pulling off the frisket film. But you pull it off and then everything is protected. So I could just go crazy with my stencils and not worry about it going over the buildings and the figures and stuff. I like that. I like that stenciling kind of set back the worm and set back everything behind this screen. And it showed me, well, hey, why don't you go ahead and just do some rim lighting on your band based on those values that showed up in the stencil. Simple enough. Again, a couple of middle values and a rim light, and dude, they have dimension to them. It's as simple as that sometimes, right? And, fun little drawings are great too. All right, so I had to actually commit to some of the design on this. So I went in with a pencil and kind of drew these weird little shapes, and I'm just go ahead and keeping my value pretty simple. I'm just going to put in those little hooks dark, and then I will then react based on that to see what else I want to do to it. You can also see I used another stencil right around her hand to make a magical effect go out, right? Too much fun. So with this, I thought I was pretty much done, guys. I was ready to go. I was like, yeah, I'm finishing this thing up. Looks pretty cool. I'm feeling great about it. But no, I wasn't done. I didn't like that head. Frickin' heads the size of quarters. It had to go, dudes. I totally blasted it out. Went over it with opaque paint. I took a photograph of it on my iPad. I designed another face that I liked better. I then printed that out to scale and transferred it down on top of this again. So now that I can do the head a second time. But while I was in there, I was actually adding more atmosphere to other areas. And as I ghosted out the mouth of the worm, it was great atmospherically, but it made everything look kind of sloppy. So I just had to go in and basically mix the values that were there once I ghosted it out, but just do them a little bit more opaquely and maybe one step darker to make it look like I just didn't scumble over it, like it actually had some strokes going on. So there you go. So now we're ready to get in there and do the face. I actually pushed everything in the background back more, lit everything back up, and now we're digging in, establishing those middle values on the face, establishing the middle value for the hair. It's interesting because this is a blonde-haired character. I had to take a few liberties here because I didn't want to go platinum blonde, and you know why, right? Because the value of it would be too close to what's behind it and we would lose stuff. So you're going to have to be able to read the silhouette of her hair. Also, look at that hair. It's wild. It's crazy. It's so much more interesting than the earlier hair that I had done. And, the reason being that it just has some flow. It has some more energy to it. And I actually went back and put more atmosphere behind the figure again and slowly just kept inching that face darker because I needed the values to read on top of all that lightness that was behind the figure. So I kept my highlights contained and I didn't do them to the edge of anything, right? I kept them within the core of the face, within the core of the hair. I didn't go super bright with them. And as a result, if you squint at this right now, you should still be able to see her hair and her face. And that's what's important, that you can still get a read on that. Finally, we're going to put some strings on the harp that she's playing. I wonder what chord that is. Yeah! You know it's metal. It's got to be metal. Of course, you're going to summon that. And then we're going to brighten up what's going on with the effect behind her. Just using a little bit of straight up FW acrylic ink, tiny little brushes, and just kind of highlighting that a little bit to really get that effect of the magic. We just want to plus it a little bit, you know what I'm saying? And now we're getting really close to calling this thing done. Just a little bit more highlighting. I couldn't resist. Just a little bit more on that face. That shows you the old face and the new face and why I thought it had to be done. All right. Oh, this is a repeat video for whatever reason, so I'll have to edit that out later or not. We'll just let it run. You can see it twice as we redo again the highlighting and the magical effect that's around her hand, and we plus that thing. But now you can really feel it, right? Because you saw it a second time. Okay. Final little bits. There they go. Once again, those final little highlights. And that's it, my friends. All right, there's the final painting all scanned in. Did a few value things in Photoshop, but not very much. Squinting at it, I can absolutely see what's going on in this piece. And that is what the main point of this is, guys. There it is, the finished Chord of Calling. As ever, I appreciate you guys hanging with me. Like, subscribe, spread the word that I'm spreading the art all over the place. Appreciate that. Head over to my Instagram, Scott M. Fischer, and hit a little follow, because you see a lot of this stuff as it comes out, a lot of little videos leading up to it. And anyway, that's about it, guys. Until next time, keep pushing the pigment. Later.